Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get this started. There we go. Afternoon. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C., and this is our IEEE-USA Legislative Update. As always, if you have questions about anything we're talking about today, or anything you just want to chat about, put them in your chat box, and we'll circle back to them at the end of the presentation and see if we can get them answered, or put them on Facebook or the YouTube comments, and I will go back to those after the presentation is over and try to respond to them. So the title of this presentation was originally Moonshots, and we have a couple of very exciting things going on in Washington that could have long-term implications for IEEE members in a good way. But something happened this morning, which was not expected by anybody, that I think we need to talk about. And that thing is this. This is the unemployment rate, and we got the May numbers in early this morning. The expectation was that the unemployment rate would go up to about 20%. The expectation was actually 19.7%, and it didn't. Defying all logic, the unemployment rate actually dropped from 14.7% to 13.3%, which is odd. The number of jobs actually increased about 2.5 million. That would be the largest increase in jobs in American history. Keep in mind, we started keeping track in 1947, so the greatest increase since 1947. But either way, this is good news. Now, a couple caveats. These monthly numbers are reliable, are notoriously prone to error. It's very difficult for the Bureau of Labor Statistics to gather information, within a week of the end of the month. They do an extraordinarily good job, but these numbers are frequently adjusted a month, 2 months, 3 months out as more better data gets in. So there will be some wiggling, but it is unlikely that there'll be an 8-point shift in the unemployment rate. The change is usually a couple tenths of a percentage point. The chart that I have up here shows the unemployment rates for various segments of the population. Now, what we're most concerned about with IEEE is the green chart on the bottom. That's the unemployment rate for people with a bachelor's degree or higher. And I know it's a little hard to read because the last couple months, the shifts in numbers have been so dramatic that they kind of blur together. But the unemployment rate for people with college degrees never reached 10%. And the unemployment rate for engineers are more likely to be employed than almost any other subset of the population. And so our unemployment rate is considerably less than the roughly 7% rate that people with college degrees have. And of course, people with higher degrees are less likely to be employed generally than people with just a bachelor's. One thing I did want to note on this chart, though, you look, we have a light blue chart for high school graduates with no college and a black line for some college or an associate's degree, but no bachelor's degree. And you'll notice the two lines are actually very similar. And this points to a trend that's kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but I think it's important to note anyway, that attending college and not getting a degree is not nearly as good as getting a degree. Now, ideally, I would like to break out some college and associate's degrees because I suspect the associate's degree number will be lower, the unemployment rate will be lower than people who attended college but didn't graduate. But the bottom line is, this is good. And like I think I mentioned, the job gain in May was the highest on record. Now, we have to add a caveat to that note to point out that the job losses in March and April were dramatically worse and were also the worst on record. And so we certainly are nowhere back to normal. But this is a positive sign. One of the big debates amongst economists and policymakers and talking heads and just regular people over the last month or so was how quick a recovery would be once the COVID restrictions were started to be lifted. And the prevailing wisdom among most economists was that the recovery would be rather shallow and gradual. This data points to a much more dramatic and rapid recovery. Not it's going to take more than a month or two, but for a dramatic shutdown in the economy followed by a radical improvement in the economy is not out of the question. And the first little piece of data we have here suggests that that might be what's happening. Now, let's look a little closer at the tech fields. These numbers are unpublished data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And before we start, I want to thank Lisa Williamson at BLS for providing them to me. The federal government employees get a lot of criticism, and some of it's warranted. But I wanted to point out, I sent a cold email to Lisa Williamson, who is an economist at BLS, a couple weeks ago asking for this data, which, like I said, is not published. It took her about 4 hours to get me the data, and not only get me the data, but get a lot more data than I'd asked for. And I casually mentioned, hey, would love to see the May numbers when they come out. She emailed me the May data this morning, about 40 minutes after they were made public. And so, first of all, I want to say Bureau of Labor Statistics is one of the finest statistics agencies in the world. It is a great government agency that does fantastic work, and it's nice to see that they're also responsive to just regular people asking them for help. I've never met Lisa Williamson. She doesn't know who I am, but she was still very helpful, and I'm grateful for that. So the BLS breaks the employment data down by a job category. And the two categories that we care most about are computer and mathematical fields and engineering and architecture fields. Now, the first thing we have to notice about these is that in both categories, there are people included who are not IEEE members, probably. Mathematicians and architects, we have some of them in our membership, but not very many. So these numbers are not strictly IEEE members. However, the computer fields and the engineering fields are vastly bigger than the mathematical and architectural fields. So the bulk of people in both these categories are IEEE members and people who should be IEEE members. We have two sets of data here. The top are the number of jobs. So this is the number of people who are actually employed in these fields. The bottom section are the number of unemployed in these fields, or at least, formally in these fields. And what we have is a very confusing picture. You'll notice that the computer and mathematical fields, the number of jobs has actually gone up. That is not too surprising given how many people have entered a digital world for shopping, for work, for communication, for all the things we're now doing online. Engineering and architectural field, we are basically the same as we were in February in terms of number of jobs, about 1,000 fewer. It's worth noting that these sector-specific employment numbers have a high error rate. Some of the sample sizes are fairly small, and so they tend to wiggle from month to month on their own anyway. So 1,000 person difference from February to May is essentially the same. But if we look at the unemployment numbers, we get a different picture. The number of unemployed computer and mathematical people has increased significantly, and the number of unemployed engineers and architects has more or less tripled. And so we have an improving employment picture and a decaying employment picture on the same chart. Now, it is worth noting that both the unemployment numbers have improved from April to May, which is good and is consistent with the macro numbers that we've seen. But this situation where we have increasing employment and increasing unemployment in the same sector suggests that pieces of these professions are doing quite well and are expanding, and other pieces are having problems and are contracting. That is not inconceivable given what's going on in the economy, but it is worth noting that the engineering and technology worlds do appear to be holding up better in the current economic environment than many other sectors. A couple other signs of life that I think are worth noting. The chart on the left there is the number of air passengers screened by the TSA. So these are the number of people that checked into flights, and they've been increasing. And we're a little bit above where we were at the end of March when things started to get really bad. We are still really far behind where we were a year ago. But again, people are starting to fly again, which suggests that life is starting to get back to normal. CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, one of the largest, as many of you know, trade shows in our industry, announced this week that they will be holding CES in January of 2021 in Las Vegas, and it will be in person. There are some other very, very tenuous signs that the meeting business is starting to open up again. People seem willing to travel. Venues are starting to be willing to host them. Again, January is a long way off, 6 months from now, but we're starting to see signs of life popping up in a number of places around the economy, which is encouraging. Something else that we're watching is the inflation rate. The consumer price index actually fell in April about 0.8%. There was some concern that the amount of debt the federal government was taking on could trigger inflation, and it still may, but not yet. But what we have here is a chart again from, this is from the BLS, excuse me, Bureau of Labor Statistics again. And what we're seeing is the decrease in prices is almost entirely due to energy prices, oil, where oil prices have fallen dramatically. Other prices, and that's that red column that barely shows up on the left there, have barely moved. Now this, keep in mind, this is April 2019 versus April 2020. So, it's not showing the immediate economic crisis, but prices have basically been flat. Energy prices have pulled it down. Food prices have gone up a little bit. Some of the supply shortages that we've seen have pushed that. And this is consistent with what I'm seeing in a micro level. I had expected that, Lowe's, Home Depot, Toyota, other places that sell large products that are easy to defer would have some significant sales in April and May to lure customers back. That's kind of standard business procedure when there's an economic slowdown. You want to generate cash, you want to move inventory, so you lower your prices. We didn't actually see that. Companies kept their prices pretty stable. And that suggests that even if demand dropped, businesses were expecting it to recover fairly quickly, and so they didn't drop their prices, assuming that anybody who didn't buy a car or a grill or an oven or some other large purchase, if they didn't make the purchase in April, they'll probably make them in June, and so the company would just wait a little bit, assuming things would pick up. Now, that doesn't mean things will pick up, but it does suggest that there's reason, that the business community at least thinks there's reason for optimism. A couple of things that IEEE-USA is keeping an eye on. The manufacturing sector furloughed a huge number of workers as shifts were cut and factories were shut down temporarily. There are some signs in May, although they didn't show up in the macro numbers, but there were some signs in May that some of the manufacturing industries were turning those furloughs into layoffs, which is a concern. It is possible that the economy is adding back workers in, say, the service industry, particularly in restaurants, as they slowly start to reopen, but cutting jobs in other places like manufacturing, expecting a longer-term slowdown. Now, we don't know that's happening yet. We're just keeping an eye on it. There's no actual indication that's happening, but it could be. And the fact that a number of large companies have announced layoffs in the last couple of weeks suggests that this is something we should worry about. We're also worried about what the universities are doing. A number of universities announced layoffs in the last week or so, including of tenured professors. About 40% of IEEE's members in the United States work for academia or the government. Some states are also laying off people. We have no indication at this point that the engineering fields, professions, and departments are being hit by these layoffs, but we don't know they're not either. So we have signs of optimism in the economy, but there's still some things that we have to watch to see how healthy the tech sector actually is. So the first moonshot that we want to talk about briefly is SpaceX and NASA. The SpaceX successfully launched a privately built spacecraft containing 2 actual human beings, launched successfully last week. I don't know if anybody able to watch it. I was watching it. And it successfully docked with the International Space Station, where our astronauts are now living presumably happily for a little while. And this represents a major success, not only for SpaceX, but for American space exploration, because this mission cost hundreds of millions of dollars less than a typical NASA mission would cost. It's also worth noting that this mission had much cooler looking spacecraft. When you have private sector companies building spaceships, they have a better sense of aesthetics and willing to spend a little more time making the spaceships looking cool than apparently NASA would. Not that the Apollo ships weren't cool looking, but I mean, face it, that's a pretty cool looking spaceship. So this is very exciting. I can tell you that the support for commercialized space flight on Capitol Hill is bipartisan and bicameral. There were a couple letters floating around Congress last week and this week endorsing commercial space flight. Does not mean that support is universal. Some legislators have a couple concerns about it that we'll have to keep an eye on. And if commercial spaceflight really takes off, NASA manufacturing facilities in some areas could be hit. And so we need to keep an eye on that, and also an eye on how legislators from those states and districts respond. But at the moment, this is a great success. And IEEE is proud of the men and women who made this happen, and are proud of those that are affiliated with IEEE. For those of you who want a little more information on the state of commercialized spaceflight, there is a Congressional Research Service report. The link to it is on your screen there. It's from late 2018, so it's a little bit dated now, but it still gives you a pretty good summary of where we are. So, moonshot number 2, the Endless Frontier Act. This piece of legislation was introduced last week, and it represents, it's described by its sponsor, Senator Schumer from New York, as a moonshot. It is designed to be a direct response to international competition on research, and specifically technology. It calls for $100 billion in new funds to be spent on predominantly technology research over the next 10 years. It will do that through the National Science Foundation, which would be renamed the National Science and Technology Foundation. A new directorate would be created within the NSF, now the NSTF, specifically looking at technology. And they would not only fund research into technology, but would spend money and resources on tech transfer to help move brilliant ideas in academia and national labs into the private sector. There's an additional $10 billion allocated for technology hubs around the country to help make that happen. Scholarship money for undergraduate, graduate, postdocs, and tech training programs. And I think that last one is the most important. Well, they're all important, but that's the most interesting because that funds community colleges and other tech jobs that don't necessarily require a college degree. There are lots of unfilled jobs in the tech sector for skilled workers who don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree. And there are lots of people that can profit from those, and it's nice to see that recognized in legislation. A little more on the bill itself. It's sponsored by Senators Schumer and Young, Democrat from New York, and Senate Minority Leader, and Young from Indiana, Republican. In the House, the bill is sponsored by Ro Khanna, a good friend of ours, Democrat from California, and Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. And so what we have here is a endangered species in Washington, a bicameral, bipartisan bill with support across the political spectrum, which is very exciting. Now, the other thing to note about this bill is the drafters did something very, very smart. They indicated that the new tech directorate at NSF could focus its resources on precisely 10 priority areas. The NSF has the authority to get rid of some of these or replace them, but it can't add to the list, which I think is a good deal, because what happens in a lot of these programs is you add research area after research area after research area, and you spread yourself too thin. Sponsors said, no, we're going to do 10 areas. They're listed there on your screen. Now, these are broad areas. They cover a lot of territory, but they are almost entirely focused on things that IEEE members do and things that IEEE members care about, which is exciting. Pardon me. IEEE-USA has endorsed this bill, and we've put a request out for IEEE members to contact their senators and express your support for this bill as well. Quick update on immigration policy. We have conflicting developments in the H-1B world. A federal court ruled that IT consulting jobs do not qualify for H-1B visas. IEEE-USA has been arguing that for years, and we're thrilled that the courts have finally caught up with us. Unfortunately, at the same time, in response to a different court decision, the USCIS dropped additional requirements for third-party H-1B placements. So at the same time, the USCIS was deciding not to prevent consulting companies from getting H-1Bs, a court ruled that it could. I don't know what that court decision the effect that court decision will have on the USCIS moving forward, but we hope they take this issue up again soon. Some other things going on Capitol Hill that we're watching. Well, executive order is not Capitol Hill. It's coming out of the White House. There's rumors of an executive order suspending, limiting, or ending OPT, that's optional practical training, for students for a year, perhaps longer. OPT is the status that students go on after they graduate. So international students that come here on a student visa, graduate, they are allowed to stay on the student visa in OPT. OPT allows them to take basically any job that they want for almost 3 years if they're in a tech field. Now, IEEE-USA has identified problems with the OPT program in the past, and we still think the program should be reformed. The problem is, if there's no OPT, it's going to be very, very difficult for an international student to stay in this country after they graduate unless they go on an H-1B visa, which we'd rather they not do. The effect of a ban or suspension to the program will be more international students will leave after graduating, becoming our international competitors, which is something we would rather avoid. So IEEE-USA is not excited about this executive order, but it identifies, points a finger at a problem with the OPT program itself, which is the legal justification for the program is very slight. And what that means is the actual law creating the OPT program is very, very tiny. And most of the program has been done through executive order and regulations. Well, if the president creates a program or expands a program based on an executive order, the president can get rid of the program with an executive order too, which is why these things should really be enshrined in law. We expect further restrictions on Chinese students. This is a law that has been introduced, a bill rather. There's actually a couple bills in Congress targeting Chinese students, restricting their ability to come here at all, restricting their ability to major in particular fields, including just about all the fields that IEEE members work in. It is not clear that any of these proposals have any traction at the moment, but we do expect them. They have more traction and more support in Congress than they did a year ago, and so we're keeping an eye on that. We're also noting a decline in the number of foreign student applications to American colleges. Now, not too many people were applying for college in February and March and April. And so there's a sincere concern among universities that the international student applicant pool will decline dramatically in, over the summer when applications come in because of visa restrictions, because of the social unrest, because of the economy. And that could have some very severe financial implications for the universities. So IEEE-USA is keeping an eye on all of that. One other piece of big, exciting news, Dr. Seth Anathan was approved by the Senate Help Committee for the position of NSF Director. He was nominated back in December by President Trump, and he's now been confirmed by the Senate Committee. His vote was not partisan. It was unanimous, so that suggests the full Senate will approve him rather quickly. Now, the way these nominations typically go is once they pass the committee, it is unlikely that they will be stopped on the Senate floor, particularly if they are unanimous like the good doctor was. We do not have a date for when the Senate will confirm him, but we do expect it to happen in June, fingers crossed, and then we will have an IEEE fellow running the National Science Foundation, which is quite exciting. As always, IEEE and IEEE-USA have a number of online resources designed to help IEEE members in these times. These pages are constantly updated, so if you checked them out last month, please go back and check them out again. There may be new resources that would be of help to you. IEEEUSA.org/help. The IEEE Foundation continues to successfully raise money for COVID-related projects, and then spectrum.ieee.org, has a great page of resources across the Institute. Our next update will be in 2 weeks, June 19th at 1 o'clock. And I want to give you a quick update on what we expect to be talking about in July. A number of reports out this week that the Earth's magnetic field is doing bizarre things. The field's been weakening for a while now, and now the point where the magnetic field is weakest seems to be splitting and moving, and nobody knows why or what effect this will have on anything. So given how 2020 has been proceeding so far, we expect that to come to a head in about 3 weeks. And with that, I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA. My email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Phone number is 202-530-8326. And with that, I'm going to shift over to my other screen to see if there are questions. Immigration from Hong Kong. Now, that's an interesting question. Mr. Will Robinson, by the way, is our Vice President of Government Relations. That's exciting. There has been nothing that I've heard in Washington about extending special visas to citizens from Hong Kong. I mean, there's been no proposals. There's been talk about it. It is worth noting, however, that the British government has announced that they will welcome Hong Kong citizens who wish to flee if China begins violating the special status that Hong Kong has been given since it reverted back to China back in 1999. I suspect that the discussion of what to do with Hong Kong citizens will accelerate over time, but right now we don't have any specific proposals floating around in Congress. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. By the way, if you're posting your questions on Facebook or on YouTube, I cannot see them at the moment, but we'll check with them in half an hour or so, and we'll try to respond and get back to you. All right, I don't see anything else. Thank you for tuning in today. I look forward to talking with you all in 2 weeks. Let's keep our fingers crossed that the economy continues to recover. Hope all of you are personally doing well, and look forward to hearing from you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.